you've transcended a liminal threshold into History Fuzz, a realm of contemplative inquiry in which leading researchers discuss the motivations, tools and skills of the skywatchers, surveyors, architects and builders who delineated monumental landscapes with awe-inspiring structures, enshrining their diverse cosmic chronicles in stone. I'm your host, Ashley Cowie. You can unlock videos, maps, articles, and enjoy early ad-free new episodes by becoming a member on historyfuzz.com, where you can also apply to join our team exploring and filming archaeology documentaries in the Andean highlands of Colombia. Claus Clausen has a background in astrophysics, and he works as an independent researcher associated with the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen, Denmark. Having mapped the alignments of funnel beaker culture passage graves across Western Europe, in this episode Claus describes a matrix of sites with lunar orientations, and he shares his theory about a megalithic lunar seasonal pointer. And introducing a perplexing historical anomaly, Claus describes triangular assemblies of burial sites within monumentalized landscapes. To begin with, I'd like you to explain the origins of the funnel beaker culture.
In fact, we do not really know it was an imported knowledge or it came with people from south. But I think that we have found that people from south already were in Denmark. So maybe it's a mixture. We don't know. So maybe they learned from south, people coming from south, or they already discovered it because some traveled down to the south. And in fact, the funnel beaker culture, it was not the only one in Europe at that time. It seems to start maybe in Portugal, where people built megalithic monumentum from about 7000 BC. The problem in Denmark is that there was only stones to collect to these megalithic monumentums. So I guess it took a very long time to construct these megalithic monumentums.
Oh.
And the idea is that they were built within a couple of 100 years. There was built about 40,000 of these monuments in Denmark. And it's quite complicated because we don't know all the idea about how they were constructed. We know they had to collect earth and they had to collect stones, and maybe it took about half a year to collect material for one megalithic monumentum. And all these monumentums, they are divided in different shapes. And the first ones was not really megalithic monumentum. It was only what you could call long dolmens. They were a big mouth, about maybe the biggest one is about 200 meters, and it's only constructed of earth and a chamber of tree. And later the tree was what do you say, replaced by stones.
Mm-hmm.
And also these are called long dolmens, and they have a stone. They have chambers with an opening towards the horizon, and they could have chambers about 2, 3, maybe 4 chambers was the most seldom ones, Normally they have 2 or 3 chambers, sometimes only 1. And these monuments with the long barrows, they started to build them about 3900 BC, and later 3600 BC. Then we have the dolmens, the long dolmens and the small dolmens, which are circular construction. And after the dolmens, then we have the passage graves, which are much heavier construction than the older ones. And they were built about 3200 before BC.
Yep.
In the beginning, maybe this construction was not graves. We have had some discussions here in Denmark is what was the original purpose of these constructions. And I discovered during my investigations, where I measured the direction of the chamber opening and also the direction of the mount itself. It means if it was a long dolmen, you had an x of length, you can measure the direction of this x or axis, and mostly the chamber are parallel to this x or perpendicular to the x.
Could you give me an example of a solar archaeoastronomical alignment within one of the chambers and passage graves?
No, there seems no evidence for the sun except for the equinox.
Do you think the equinox was important in their cosmology?
Yes, but it's not equinox in a common sense. It was 2 times a year. First time it happens in the spring and in the autumn or fall. On a certain date, the full moon rise and the sunrise, they cross over. So the full moon, you can say, jump from one side of the sun to the other side of the sun's rising point. This is called the megalithic equinox, and this is common in whole Western Europe and has been it for thousands of years. But there's no specific solar alignments, I think, except for where I live. There is one long dolmen which approximately points towards the rising point of the sun at the equinox, as we made the definition of that. But I'm not sure that's right.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we've ticked off solar. Without jumping to lunar just right away, do you notice any alignments to planetary or to celestial, to stars?
No, I'm not sure.
So that leaves lunar.
Yes, I've done many statistical tests to see if it was solar or lunar or star alignments, but or maybe star sign or picture, but I do not see any evidence for that.
Okay, so let's start with the moon.
Yes.
Let's go back to the earliest date you mentioned. You mentioned the date 3800 BC, and then you brought it to 3200 BC. Could you give us a really good, clear example of one site that shows orientation to an important rising point of the moon or an important cycle?
Yeah. Then we have to understand that most megalithic monuments, they are formed clusters where you can have up to about 10 to 15 members in a cluster. And in this cluster, you find the lunar solar crossover direction is about 100 degrees from geographical north. Then you find the direction towards the southern inner standstill point of the moon, and also the outer standstill points. So you have 3 directions, which seems to be very important.
Yep.
And they are When we are talking about passage graves, which are the latest constructions of the megalithic monuments in Denmark, you see almost all three in a cluster. But if we go back to the long barrows, this is more complicated because sometimes there's only one or two, and very seldom all three directions. And that is something I do not understand, because I have no idea how you build. You have many clusters which are maybe only few kilometers from each other, but in one cluster you only have one important direction, and in the other cluster you have two directions of the important ones. They're missing maybe some megalithic monuments, but in the area where I live, we have nearly complete clusters, and they are very strange how they are constructed almost similar.
Do you think that observation that you've just outlined, that paradox, wouldn't that suggest that the sites were purely ritual, monumental, rather than calendrical devices for watching the passing of the moon?
I think there's many layers in how to understand the constructions. Normally, you only find what you are looking for. And in the beginning, when I began my measurements, I was only looking for directions of the megalithic monuments. That's my idea, and the hypothesis was that we assumed that they were there were sidelines towards a point at the horizon, or maybe a point in the landscape. And later, a Danish archaeologist, he discovered the sightlines. The sightlines were made before they built the monuments. So if you dig beneath the monument, you will find the sightline.
So, what you really need to do here is define what you mean by a sightline.
And that's it complicated, because in the beginning, if you follow a sightline, then 1 or 2 kilometers away from the first monument, you will find the next one. And so they are linked out in the landscape in a very complex system, like a spider net, for example. The only thing I can see is that they can point forwards or backwards. So if you go backwards from one monument and follow the sideline for the first, you can call it the source monument, you find the next one behind. So it means that you look, you have to look behind you and in front of you. And it gives a very complex structure. But the sidelines were made before the monument. So there is, I think, if you dig beneath the monument, you can find a row of stones, which are the sideline.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yes, the passage itself also follow the sideline beneath it. So the direction was decided before you built the monument. Interesting.
Okay, so what's very interesting about that is you're suggesting the sight lines themselves were monumentalized.
Yes, you can say that. That's one function of the monument.
Okay.
It was also a marker in the landscape. So you can see, I don't know, I don't know how they were thinking in the Neolithic times, but maybe in this cluster where they were living around, the people, in fact, we do not really know if they were living besides the monuments or a little part away from the monuments. But if a mother was talking to her child, then she could say, if you follow that direction, you will find the place where your grandmama is living. It's just an idea, but it's a GPS system in a 3D GPS system in full scale, and that has nothing to do with astronomy, except that it was run by the moon. But we can come back to that.
What a wonderful place to get to. Professor Giulio Magli from the Milan Polytechnic explained the difference between archaeoastronomically derived alignments and cosmologically, mythologically significant alignments. Have you studied the actual topography in relationship to these sightlines? Do the sightlines connect with important parts of the landscape that might hold mythological significance?
No.
Every time so far I've tried to sound smart, you've batted me down, so this is great.
No, but okay. First of all, most megalithic monuments are on the highest place in the landscape, so you can easily see from one to another.
Okay.
That's we call intervisibility. You can see from one monument to the other monument, maybe many million kilometers. I used to bring my magnetic compasso when I'm traveling, and once I was on Bali in Indonesia, and there was a lot of temples around a big volcano. I don't know, cannot recall its name, but the entrance of the temple was pointing towards the mother temple on the volcano.
Oh.
I discovered that after 1 month, but this was the volcano, the monument, and the mother temple was there. I don't know why, but that's it. And we saved this in Jordan. Also, when they have some dolmens also in Jordan, they are also pointing towards a little mountain. But that's not the case in Denmark.
Can I ask you to clear up something you said earlier? At the very beginning, you said 40,000 monuments. Did I pick that up right?
That's right, yes. That's a maximum estimate.
Over what period of time? Between 3,800 and 3,200 BC?
No, maybe between 3,600 BC and 3,200 BC. And there was only living about 200,000 people in Denmark about that time. So they have been very active.
Have you considered that potentially the act of sourcing the materials, transporting the materials, was similar to cathedral building, whereby shaping stones was seen to be working in the service of God?
Yeah, I think it was very important to build these monuments. And I think also that the lines was important. So monuments and lines and markers in the landscape. It had been a very big effort for the people at that time to build these monuments because there were so few people. So I don't know how they had time to reproduce themselves or to make. Funnel beaker culture was a farmer's culture, so they also have to do farming and maybe they were hunting, and there was many tasks to do. I don't know how they managed to do that.
Would it suggest to you the rise of a hierarchy whereby there's a controlling class who sees putting people to work building monuments as a way of controlling a society, or am I jumping the gun?
No, you're not jumping the gun.
Oh, once.
Yes, you were lucky this time. Yeah, I think that there was a blueprint behind all of it. I don't know how they get the idea to do that, but it seems that there was a chief, what do you call culture? There was a leading team which explained people what to do and how to do it, and how if it was a priest organization or whatever you should call it, I don't know. But many of the monuments, we know that important people were buried in them later. In the beginning, there was no burial. It was later they began to bury people in the monuments. So the purpose in the beginning, we do not really know, but a suggestion could be that they were putting seed for corn into the chambers because they were very dry and yeah. It could be like that.
At the beginning, you mentioned a chamber of 3 antechambers. Is that right? Did I pick that up right? Because that sounds similar to Maze Howe in Orkney and Newgrange in Ireland, which had the passage with the 3 antechambers.
Some forms of the later passage grave, they are nearly have the same form. They're like a cross form where you have a side chamber, but they're very seldom. I only know about 20 of these. Something more important in a construction, if you have a more or less complete cluster lying on the highest point in the landscape, then around, like the one you mentioned, around this cluster is also a lot of passage graves. They are pointing towards the cluster. So it means that it's pointing toward the most secret place at locally, I think.
Yeah. In your work, Klaus, you used a very specific term. You said that the moon was perhaps used as a seasonal pointer. Could you please elaborate on that?
I broke down the rising pattern of the moon for a year,
Okay.
or for many years, for many hundred years, and then I discovered that each moon, okay, it's the same moon we are talking about. I mean, there's no different moons in this case. It's the same moon we are seeing. But if you, for example, uh, take a moonrise in January, then you can find the next January moon the following year. And if you continue to find this January moon, let us call it January moon, because the moon, a rising pattern for the moon has a period of 42 days. So in fact, it's more than months. But then you can break down all 12 or 13 moon rises for a year and then continue for many hundred years to see how it looked like. And that's how I discovered the season pointer. So in the beginning, the megalithic equinox, which point about 100 degrees, and it's very interesting because this direction is independent of latitude.
Can you tell me which date that megalithic equinox occurs on? Do you know the date offhand?
No, because it changes. This year, it was the 28th of September, and the months after, you had a partial lunar eclipse.
At the location, 3000 BC, somebody is watching the moon rising or setting and knows that this is the megalithic eclipse. How does somebody 40 miles to the south also use that moon? How does the moon function? What is it they're looking for as the seasonal pointer? What does the moon do?
I think it's symbolic, as you mentioned in your mail,
Yeah,
because it's not a specific date.
this is it.
It has, as I said, yeah. So maybe it's not the time for seed, but it's more than okay. We have already done it because you can see how the weather is now. It's time to do it, and afterwards you get the megalithic equinox, which are, and then you can make a ritual for spring. And the next moon is during the summer. It's the inner standstill point moon. It's also the direction where you have the most moon rises. So that could be an important direction. And finally, the most southern lunar standstill. It is. It means it's the middle of the summer,
Yeah,
and afterwards you get yeah. So it's more symbolic that now we have spring, we have midsummer, and then we have fall, and that could what was a reason for ritual praxis, I think.
I have a question which I would really like to ask you because it genuinely confuses me. So last week I interviewed two authors of a book about the Coligny calendar, the alleged Celtic calendar. Now, they used Stonehenge as an example of the lunar calendar, and they said there are 56 stones in a circle on the first period of Stonehenge. Now, Klaus, my question is this. To me, if you have a circle of stones and you're using those to mark where the moon rises on the horizon, wouldn't all of the stones in the north part of the circle where the moon doesn't rise be completely redundant? Again, suggesting Stonehenge is completely symbolic, but those two professors were quite adamant that it functioned as a visual calendar. What am I not seeing here?
Okay, there's a theory made by an English astronomer, Gerald Hawkins, in the 60s. The problem is that we only know one example of that kind of construction. And in this construction, you have all the standstill points of the moon marked in another circle. The lunar cycle, as we know it today, is 18.61 year. And it's very close to the Mentonian cycle, which it was a Greek astronomer. Have you know about it? Yeah.
Yep.
The 19-year Mentonian cycle is an approximation to the lunar cycle of 18.61 year. If you use the 56 stones, it is a combination of 19 years and 18 years.
Sure.
Yeah. And then 56 now by 3. Yeah, it's very close to the lunar cycle of 18.61 year.
Very.
And then if you use this a circle with the 56 holes, you can start, you have, for example, a lunar eclipse, and where the moon rises when you have a lunar eclipse, you put a stone in one hole. Then you move 9 or 10 holes, I think, and put a new stone, and then you continue until you reach the first hole. Then every time you had a lunar eclipse, you move the stones one hole. And next time a stone will hit the first hole, then you will have a lunar eclipse. But I think you should read a little about Gerald Hawkins and his idea.
I discounted it because last year, Professor Magley, who I mentioned, published a paper proving that Stonehenge doesn't function really accurately as a calendar. It's like 6 days off, even on the solstice.
No.
And he also suggests while the hippies go there today and look to the northeast, it's perhaps the southwest they should be looking on the solstice, you know?
But you have every 400 years, you have to restart the position of the stones, and then it works. It can work about 400 years.
Okay.
I think it's okay.
So it's actual observatory, you're saying? It can function as an observatory?
You can call it an analog computer.
Let me ask you then. So there are 16 stones in the north beyond where the moon rises. What are those? How do those work? The stones in the north that would never mark anywhere on the horizon that the moon would be seen. Is it because it's a calculator? Is it because the circle is a calculator?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So you don't need any moon rises in that north.
Hallelujah. What you're saying is it doesn't really matter if you can't see the moon for weeks at a time because of climate.
No, you can calculate the eclipses, yes.
Okay.
But some people who are against the Hawkins idea say, okay, it's too seldom that they can see a lunar eclipse because living for a person at that time, maybe a median living time was about 37 or 6 years, I don't know, maybe 40 at the maximum. So they can only see one or maybe two eclipses in their living time, and it's too little. And I think also that's too little. So I don't know how it must have any function, some other function, Stonehenge also. They can foresee more eclipses because this lunar season pointer, as I call it, can predict eclipses with a rate of about one every 3 or 4 years. That is better.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can see, but it works in another way, because if you have full moon rise
Mm-hmm.
during a year very close to the two southern standstill points,
Mm-hmm.
you can expect an eclipse after full moon rise, either in the spring or in the fall, where you have the solar crossover. It's interesting. It's called a standstill eclipse.
A standstill eclipse.
Yes.
Dependent on latitude or not?
No, I think it's general. I've not investigated the problem deeply, but it's a geometrical problem. But I think it's the same. For example, when I was in Greece, we saw some late Minoan graves. They look like passage graves. They were,
Yeah.
they have the same orientation pattern as the Danish ones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So they have done the same thing, and it was about 1400 BC.
Mm-hmm.
So it's later. So now I have to go to Greece and talk with the Greek archaeologists about that. So I have the solution for the orientation.
Yeah. In Andean cosmology of South America, when the sun and the moon eclipse, that's seen as the most sacred day of the year because it's a union of the male sun god and the lunar goddess. But I can only imagine if that event that you just described was visible here, that would be, the holy of holies as far as sacred dates go.
And you have to remember that a lunar eclipse is much more easier to observe than a solar one. First of all, if you can see the full moon, you can see the eclipse. And the duration for a total eclipse may be 3 or 4 hours. If you have solar eclipse, it's 5-6 minutes, maybe 7 as a maximum. But okay, we know today that a solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, they have a delay between them about 2 weeks. And maybe the Babylonian they knew about it because they were good in observing, and the Greeks also know it. But in Neolithic times, I'm not sure that they could observe, they could predict solar eclipses.
A question that rises from this: you mentioned Babylonians and Greek astronomers. They had forms of tablature. They could write, they could record. How on earth in Neolithic Northern Europe were the codes of the moon passed down if people were only living till their early 30s and maybe only seeing one eclipse? How on earth was that knowledge passed down?
I don't know. But they had been known for many thousand years, this knowledge. And also we have to consider the weather. It's more there's more sun. It's more cloudy during the winter. That's why I think they were not interested in winter eclipses, because they could not see them. But in the summer the weather is better, also during the night. And this is an important point. The days in Denmark around midsummer, they are about 6 or 7 hours. Not the days, I mean the nights. So if there will come a lunar eclipse, it's very closer to the actual eclipse time. I don't know if you can follow me.
Oh, I'm following you, but I have to go into cosmic silence.
Okay.
I can see how rhyme and story and oral tradition could perhaps condense some of these things. Do you regard the Coligny bronze calendar, which depicts an alleged Celtic lunar calendar, as something genuine and something real, or do you think it's been hijacked with pop cultural interpretations?
I think the last thing you mentioned is a
Really?
possibility.
40% of it exists to be studied. There are definite patterns that can be derived from it, but you can't tell me you are 100% about anything if you only have 40% in a sample set. Is that right or wrong? What do you think?
Then we have to talk about a little about statistics.
Do
I have built a lot of theoretical models which I have tested towards my observations. And you can never be sure about statistics, but if you only have 40% of you were expect to have, then I think it's just like a guess. Normally, when you make a statistical calculation, we say that. Have you heard about the nil hypothesis?
yes, I have the nil hypothesis. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. If you have more than 90% match with the observations with your model, then I think you could be quite sure that the observations and the data from the model is pulled out of the same pool of data. So there's a very high possibility that we are talking about the same stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky. My lunar the season pointer hypothesis. It's about. I think the match is 99%
Okay. Yeah.
if I compare to my model. So I'm quite sure that what we are talking about is in fact the case. And nobody has argued against the hypothesis, and I have never been challenged anyway.
So yours is statistically stands up statistically with 99% accuracy.
Yeah.
What you've talked about here.
Yes.
But this Cologne calendar, and the reason I'm so obsessed with this calendar at this moment is because the numbers that are derived from that calendar, the 8, the 5, the 19, the 56, these are all very important fundamental lunar numbers, but when I go and look at the actual bronze tablet, I see there that so many gaps have been filled. There's so many leaps of faith have to be taken, but the numbers that are drawn from it do relate firmly with the moon. And, you know, Julius Caesar did mention the Druids using a lunar calendar. Can you talk on the Magdellenberg site? I'm next week interviewing a Dr. Allard Mees about that specific site, which he said has 62 stones on the circumference, which everybody says, oh, well, there you go, there's your 62, the lunar number. What do you think about that site? Do you think it's again a lunar site or not?
I don't know. At 62, I cannot. How is this number 62?
Yeah. The Colony Lunisolar calendar is based on a 5-year cycle. Each have 12 lunar months, so 5 times 12, with 2 intercalary months added. So 5 times 12 plus the 2 intercalary months is 62. And that is how many post holes were round at the Magdellenborg site. So does that site, being so old and so massive, represent a lunar shrine, if you like, or not?
My impression, without understand, maybe I should write an article about this. 62, the number 62. There is a lot of traps in archaeoastronomy. There's a lot of traps, and maybe just to find a solution, maybe you construct one yourself, which are not real. Maybe I'm being trapped in the same way, but I think my statistics help me a great deal. But I think these traps are there. It's very easy to fall in a trap like this. I have to study an article about the calendar you are talking about before I understand exactly. Yeah. So if you can send me a link, not now, but
I'll send you a link to the interview with the two professors who have written books about this. And when you hear their arguments, it would be great to have you come back on in the future and have you discuss your thoughts on it. Because I think this is a wonderful example of what you're talking about. This line is in Cambodia in 1989, Dr. Eleanor Macknick wrote this paper based on her measurements of the Angkor Wat temple, and she presented this blinding display of numerology whereby the cubit measurements matched the number of days in the year, the vertical measurement from such and such a point within the chamber of God to the roof matched the number of days in a Venus cycle. It's all shite, Klaus. It truly is. Where do you take the measurements from the inner side of this wall to the outer side of this one? And what these people do is they pull all of the measurements and they select the ones that best match the predetermined notion. And I suspect that this approach is infecting lunar astronomy right across the world and research into it.
Unfortunately, we have many cases of that. Also, I've been working together with some scientists in other countries, and then I discovered some of them selected by purpose something which was not true.
Yep.
For example, rock carvings from Sweden, but the person who was working with them has changed the rock carvings.
No.
So they were, yes.
To suggest they're something else that rather than they are.
Yeah.
Really? That's academic crime.
Yes, when I pinpointed that to the scientist, I never heard anything back again.
Gone. So do they only surround themselves with people who go, yeah, this is great, because grant checks come in on these crazy theories?
But yeah, and sometimes when you see interpretations of some ancient monuments, you only discuss what is possible to understand with our day's logic. What you cannot explain, then you leave it.
The selection effect.
The selection effect, yes. And in my case, I've been working together with some archaeologists. One of them told me that what we cannot explain, we just hide in a store in in the museum, and we cannot explain it.
Yeah.
What we cannot explain, then we leave. And I was some years ago. I was on the island Mauritius, or okay, it's a country on an island. There are 7 pyramids. These pyramids are not they are not incorporated in the guides for what tourists can see. So nobody, in fact, knows where I discovered them on Google Earth.
Why are they not in the tourist guides?
Yeah, I don't know, because they cannot explain where they came from.
That's an archaeoastronomer's dream holiday, isn't it?
Yes, you can find many things by using Google Earth, which cannot be explained.
You can. Google Earth is a good place to start, but you do have to be careful. I went and presented recently a location based on a Google Earth longitude and latitude, and Bill Romaine, an archaeoastronomer in North America, emailed me and said, "Where'd you get that measurement from?" And I was quite honest and I said Google Earth, and he explained that's a projected, estimated circular globe around an otherwise deformed Earth. But you're right, it's a great tool of exploration, a fantastic tool.
I think so.
Yeah.
But okay, I couldn't have used it sometimes also for the pyramids in Egypt.
Yeah.
in the Giza pyramids and the Saqqara pyramids. They are combined by lines, geometrical ones, but I don't know what the explanation is for that. Maybe it's you can see from both clusters of pyramids the top of the pyramids, and maybe there was gold on the top, so you can see the reflection from the sun. But if you follow the lines from Saqqara to Giza, and the line of the Giza pyramids, they are pointing towards the place where the old Heliopolis was placed.
Ah, I was on the edge of my seat when you were saying that because Professor Giulio Magli, my first episode of this podcast, he explained to the audience how they have nothing to do with Orion's belt and that they point to the temple in Heliopolis.
No.
And I was waiting for you to say Orion's belt there. Thank goodness you didn't.
No, I don't believe it. You have to know.
Yeah.
Okay, but we are missing something because we need to talk about the rituals, ritual practice, and what could make the trigger for that.
Whereabout do you mean?
You had a question in your first mail about what do you think about the ritual practice and the lunar eclipses and so on.
Yeah, yeah.
If they have seen a lunar eclipse, then it's they can observe it for several hours.
Mm-hmm.
And next, because my lunar season pointer points out many lunar eclipses during about a period of 200 years at that time. And the point is, if they see one at the same time as a megalithic equinox moon is rising, then they will see next time the megalithic equinox that the full moon is followed by an lunar eclipse. So maybe they it was very important to make direction to the megalithic equinox. The point is, it's almost the same direction it's rising in. So they have discovered lunar eclipses, if they could use them or have seen them, discovered they repeat itself with an interval of certain years. And there's another reason also. There was about 50% more lunar eclipses during Neolithic times in Denmark, and it means also other places. And then you can ask me, well, how could that be?
Let me ask you. Stop. Let me ask the question. Klaus, what on earth or otherwise are you talking about?
What on earth?
More eclipses during the Neolithic?
Yeah. This year I finished a book about the lunar eclipses, among also my measurements and my PhD. And in this book, I show how there could be 50% more eclipses. There is more lunar cycles than we are aware about.
Yes.
Normally we are talking about the Mentonian cycle, or you can talk about what we have calculated today or measured, the lunar cycle. But there's other cycles also. If you take the Mentonian cycle, the 19-year cycle, and maybe I should just say that in Stonehenge, that in the center of Stonehenge, there was supposed to be 19 stones, which refer to the Mentonian cycle, I think. But if you follow the Mentonian cycle for one full moon, let's say the 1st of January in our calendar system, then 19 years later, the same full moon is rising, also the 1st of January, and will be followed by an eclipse. Then you can continue to follow the 19-year cycle. Then you discover after 76 years, it stops. No, it don't stops. But in ancient times, they thought it was stopped. You can continue, and you will discover there will be a time gap about 27 years. Then it starts again, also on the 1st of January. You can do that for about 400 years, and then the date for the full moon rise will move one day ahead to the 2nd of January. Then you continue to follow it again, and if you are very I mean uh, aggressive in following the cycle, you discover that during, I think it's about 8,000 years, it will start at the beginning again, and then have been through all dates during a year. I call it a lunar azimuth cycle. You know that the azimuth is the rising angle for a moon or sun or whatever celestial object. I haven't found any papers about this cycle, so nobody has discovered it yet. But I think I'll write a paper about it.
Well, it's a new lunar cycle. It's fantastic. You would have thought that it would have appeared somewhere on a NASA website by now, you know?
Yeah.
It should have.
Yeah, but it's a new lunar cycle, and in the beginning I thought it was following the precession of Earth, but no, it has nothing to do with that. But these cycles I discovered in one solar calendar year, you can have 36 cycles, and sometimes these cycles they are crossing each other,
Ah.
and when they cross each other in the crossing point, you will have, instead of one lunar eclipse, you will have two within a year or two.
Can I just tell you that the indigenous culture here, which existed from 1200 AD all the way up to the arrival of the conquistadors in the 16th century, they had a lunar calendar. 20 lunar cycles, full moons, was what was known as the farmer's year. But 36 full moons was when they added 1 month called the month with no ears, because it was a correction. So 36 lunar months was their priest's year called the Zokam. So are you describing a 36-year cycle of the moon to me just now?
Yes. If I follow all these 36 cycles, I can see when they are crossing each other. And in Neolithic time, two of these cycles were crossing each other. Also, in the period we are living today, they are crossing each other also. So that's why I discovered that with the lunar eclipses, because we are in the same period now. I once was interviewed to a newspaper, and we should make an arrangement to see the lunar eclipse. And then I said, this is an old eclipse, which was also watched by our ancestors in Neolithic times. But I'm not done all the details about these cycles. I only made a model which reproduce what we can see.
Considering everything you've just told me about Neolithic observations of the moon, how do you think observing of the moon was reflected in material culture? Do you see alignments and a propensity in the arts for cardinality or for alignment, orientation, axes and crosses and lines, or not?
No, not as far as I know. But I'm only talking about Western Europe megalithic culture. I've been studying thousands of megalithic monuments. I have only seen in Denmark that they point towards special lunar full moon rises. I was told also by our other scientists they have never seen the same rising pattern as the Danish one. I don't know why it is so.
That unique lunar pattern would be essentially right the way around that latitude. Klaus, why do you think Zealand was a centre for these megalithic monuments in lunar astronomy? Why Zealand?
It has nothing to do with the weather, I think, but it has the greatest concentrations of lunar of megalithic monuments on Zealand, and also a special form which are double, or we call them twin passage graves. And why it's has something to do with the moon is that some of these double passage graves, they have two passages, and one is pointing toward either the inner southern lunar standstill point or the most southern. And funny enough, some of these passage graves are called Moon Hill, but you never see it in other countries. And okay, I've seen some in France with two passages, but I think the biggest concentration is in Denmark. And France was not in the funnel beaker culture. But in Sweden, you see also a small colony between the lakes Vänern and Vättern in the middle of Sweden. There's about 140 passage graves. They are not doubled, but they are also have the same show the same pattern, orientation pattern as the Danish ones, except for the most southern lunar standstill point. But something interesting occurred. It's not my discovery, but a Swedish professor in archaeology, I cannot recall his name, shows there were a geometrical pattern in the position of the passage graves, and they form a triangle.
Okay.
I found similar to two triangles in Denmark, where the key megalithic monument is a twin passage grave. Then this is discovered by chance, and I don't understand the meaning of that, because the triangles in Denmark, they are so big that you can only see it from the aerial photos, or do you call ortho photos.
Do you mean the buildings represent a triangle in the landscape?
Yes, and the key passage grave is the one with two directions pointing towards two other megalithic monuments a few kilometers from there, and one of them is pointing also to the last one. So it forms a triangle, but I don't understand what it means, and that's a mystery.
Whereas today we use measurements and numbers to define space and time, they would have had a much more awareness of angle, the angle from which predators came from, the angle which resources could be got from, the angle from which winds came from. So I don't think you have a chance of ever understanding the significance of the chosen angle within that matrix of sites. Would you agree?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
But I promised myself to try to understand and find the solution, but I will never find it. And I ask many people,
Yeah.
why do you think? But they don't understand the riddle.
Where I say unanswerable, it's because there must be such social, cosmological significance in those angles that I don't know how you would ever, unless they were oriented astronomically. Otherwise, you've not got a chance, do you?
As I mean, it's not astronomical orientated. It is not possible.
Yeah.
Because because some of the angles are well known, but some other angles are unknown. I don't know why. There is maybe you give me an idea.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to ask you if the angles within the triangles show simple intersections of a circle, for example, 30, 60, and 90 degrees, or whether they're things like 23 degrees, 44 degrees. Are there any patterns in the actual angles that you know of? No.
I only have three triangles, and one of the angles is 160 degrees.
Fascinating, Klaus, really fascinating. So that you've described what so many archaeoastronomers have described, especially much later in time at the Cahokia Valley. You have a series of mounds with causeways and alignments uniting them, and many of them have orientation to the maximum and minimums of the moon and no relevance to the sun whatsoever. And again, in northern Scotland, from Callanish to Broadgar, there seems to be much more underlying lunar significance than solar. But when I asked you at the start if you see any kind of summer solstice angles or orientations, you said none. There must have been a period of time, say the Bronze Age, where solar astronomy replaced lunar astronomy like it seemed to everywhere. Have you identified a timeline there?
I'm writing on paper with an archaeologist that the sun was not important in Bronze Age.
Oh my goodness, okay, great.
Yeah, because he has discovered some footprints as a rock carving footprints in Sweden, and they are pointing towards the inner southern standstill point of the moon. And I'm doing the statistics, but I don't know. Maybe we are completely wrong, or maybe
Yeah, maybe you've got this selection effect.
we simply maybe don't understand what the thinking about how they did was.
Yeah.
And maybe Neolithic logic is very different, or was very different from our time. But there's no doubt that if there's a strong peak towards a specific azimuth
Mm-hmm.
in the horizon,
Mm-hmm.
then we can interpret if it's pointing to the extreme point of the moon or extreme point of the sun. There's no doubt about that. But what the meaning or thinking about it was, we don't know. And I have a riddle which I do not think you and me can solve it. But how on earth did they choose the places to build the megalithic monuments and do their orientation at that specific point? And okay, I understand it's the highest point in locally. That's understandable, because you have to have a good view to the horizon. But then I was contacted by a guy. He told me, "Do you know that uh, that the megalithic monuments are placed where we have, it's called earth radiation. It's nothing to do, it's a kind of radiation coming from Earth which have no physical explanation." And I don't know if you know, but people can find water in the ground by using a stick. And when you are, and with these radiation, the radiation from Earth, where they are crossing each other, then the stick is bowed towards the water source in the ground. But there's no, it had nothing to do with electromagnetic radiation or so what. I said I've heard about it before, but I cannot. No, because he argued why I didn't take this subject into my book. I never describe. See, I don't see, because I haven't investigated it. So why should I take it with me? I don't understand it.
But at this stage of your career, Klaus, you also can't refer to people finding water with sticks in a scientific journal.
No.
Because I've seen it happen. We have people here who make their livelihoods finding water for water companies. But the skeptic argument, I've written about it, is this.
Mm.
They come with pendulums with emeralds on them, and they go and look for water and wells underneath farmlands. What the skeptical claim suggests is they know the terrain so well, they can see the micro undulations that we can't see. They can see coloration in the soil differences, and they can say, "Oh, my pendulum says dig here," and pay me. But it's because their families for several generations have been masters at identifying where water most likely won't be and will be within an environment. Now, you brought up a bizarre form of radiation emitting from these mounds. I've got to ask you, to even mention it, you must think in some way that these monuments were located on top of these special spots. But then, how on earth would a human being 5,000 years ago be able to detect such a radiation?
I don't know.
That's not good enough. I don't accept that.
No. No. I think that people during Neolithic times, they were more sensitive for maybe changes in the surroundings. I don't know. They were also more sensitive for observing the sun and the moon. And maybe we miss that. Why so interesting in the moon? And I agree with this interpretation that moon symbolize the god of death.
Mhm.
And here is the explanation for lunar eclipses. When they also have what we call a family culture. They celebrated the ancestors,
Yeah.
and when the moon was eclipsed, or then it was the right time to send the soul through the dark moon, because it was the opening to the kingdom of death. And if they were able to predict when it happened, when I believe they were, then they had enough time to dig the dead ones up and put them in the right position to launch their souls through the gate of the kingdom of death. That's my simple explanation.
That's fascinating, Klaus. So you think monuments were perhaps reshaped depending on conditions of the moon that were realized after a person died, aligned with the moon posthumously?
Yeah.
Really?
And I can tell you, some years ago, it was discovered that many of the, I don't know if many, but some megalithic monuments was covered by white burnt flintstone. So they were look like,
The moon.
like a full moon rising at the horizon.
Like Newgrange in Ireland, with the white quartz stones surrounding the entire chamber.
Yeah, but very little evidence is found. I mean, with ceramics, they were not artists, the Neolithic people in Denmark. They made very fine ceramics, and sometimes, by seldom, they smashed all the ceramics in on around the megalithic monuments. It could be in connection with a lunar eclipse.
Destruction and rebirth.
You know much more about that, I can hear, but you explain it very good.
I live in a lunar culture. I plant by the moon. Everything here is decided by the moon. Historically, I mean, so all my research is based in the valley of the moon here and the lunar temples here and the wells and the mounds where people returned to the womb, the actual embodiment of the full moon within the temple here on the Andes. Yeah, the moon temples were embodiments of the actual planet of the moon in the sky, not a conceptual temple, but people cosmologically believed they were entering I suppose you would call it a landscape of the moon when they entered the temple. So much so, the lunar temples here were shrouded with plate silver, so that under the full moon, the temples would, can you imagine across the landscape, silver temples under the full moon? Incredible. Where can people read your work, buy a book, or support what you're doing? Could you tell us where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can Google my name, Claus Clausen, passage graves. You can get access to some of my scientific articles and also some popular articles which are in Danish, unfortunately. The other articles are in English, And then I have my PhD hypothesis. It can be downloaded very easily.
I'll put all of your links in the show notes so people hearing this can just look at the show description and get links to all of these places, yeah. Claus, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on. We've just had a great hour and a half.
I will tell you something interesting.
Do.
Because many people had asked me how I got the idea of the season pointer and so on. And then I told them I did not read any articles concerning this subject, because there was a referee. He said, "Claus, you had not written my articles here. No, it's by purpose, so you will not disturb my thinking." That's a method. Maybe it's not a good one, but for me, it's a good one. Yes, okay, that's my final words.
That's not final. Now you've opened things up. I have to mention this. Dr. Philip Toner from the University of Glasgow is a professor of phenomenology. We just had a recording in which he deep dived the work of Heidegger and Edmund Husserl, the German phenomenologist from the 19th century. We discussed Husserl's system which he taught his students about bracketing. Before you approach any archaeological problem or phenomenological problem, you have to compartmentalize every preconceived notion, thought, education. Everything has to be compartmentalized before you can enter a fresh arena in which you can make original interpretations. So don't you dare say your system is wrong. You are unwittingly doing what some of the best minds in the last 500 years have done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, Claus. It's been really interesting, and I hope to have you back after you've published your next works and we can discuss the moon again.
Okay, then I have to begin writing on my lunar azimuth cycle.
Please do, and we can discuss that.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, drop a 5-star review or share it with a friend. And you can get in touch with me through historyfuzz.com.